This is Radio Health Journal. I'm Reed Pence. This week, understanding climate change and how it may affect everything.
You're going to see major increases in human suffering, major decreases in human productivity, and major stresses on the electric grid.
All that and more when Radio Health Journal returns.
I'm Nancy Benson, host of Radio Health Journal. If you enjoy listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
Space is something that gives us the opportunity to go someplace larger, see something grander than we possibly can see on Earth.
The billionaire space race. Then,
Western women, they consider themselves mainstream American women who were just taking advantage of the opportunities that the West gave them.
The real movers and shakers of the new frontier. I'm Marty Peterson.
and I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Viewpoints on your favorite radio station and subscribe and listen to shows anytime on Apple Podcasts and Google Play.
Climate change has been a much talked about issue for decades now. We hear how the future could be much different for our children and grandchildren if we don't take dramatic steps to reduce greenhouse gases. However, the last couple of months have added urgency to the need. In late June, hundreds of people died in Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia in a heat wave that far eclipsed all-time record temperatures. In July, massive wildfires again hit the West, and in Europe, enormous floods killed hundreds and wiped out whole towns. Extreme weather, likely fueled by changing climate, is no longer rare, and some climate scientists fear we're turning a very dangerous corner.
Well, in fact, we're seeing more extreme and more frequent. So, for example, there's a large, well-known insurance company called Munich Re that actually insures insurance companies, and they employ their own climate scientists to keep track of these extreme events because, of course, when there's a very bad one, they end up having to pay out a lot of money. So they care a lot about what's happening with these trends and extreme events. And what they've found is that over the last 40 years or so, there's been about a tripling of the frequency of extreme weather events.
That's Dr. Jennifer Francis, senior scientist at the Woodwell Climate Research Center. She says it's pretty clear that events like the Pacific Northwest heat dome wouldn't happen without changing climate.
We get heat waves, obviously. Those are nothing new. But to have broken the record temperatures by such a large margin in so many places is extremely rare. And a recent attribution study that just came to the conclusion that a heat wave of this extent, intensity, and duration was probably impossible without climate change.
Climate change has shifted the statistics. It's loaded the dice so that heat waves are more frequent and more intense than they would have been without climate change.
Dr. Radley Horton is a climate scientist at Columbia University's Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory.
This event in the Pacific Northwest was so extreme. 10 degrees or more in some places warmer than any day has been in the recorded record of 100 years or more. When the values are that extreme, we can say that climate change has not just loaded the dice, but it's profoundly shifted the statistics, making things that essentially there was no need to prepare for before climate change, things that now we need to be thinking about every year.
But it's not just a mass of hot air that creates a heat dome of historical proportions lasting for days. Climate change has effects on precipitation as well, and Francis says that's one reason why the Pacific Northwest heat wave actually had its origins long ago.
The beginnings of this heat wave come from the fact that it's been so dry out there for multiple years. It's not dry every single year, but what we've seen since about late 2013 is a tendency for very dry not just summers, but also winters, occasionally interspersed with some very heavy precipitation events. And when we end up with this very dry condition over such a long time, we end up with the soils becoming much drier. And we know that dry soil heats up much faster under a hot summer sun than a moist soil will, because if you've got moisture in the soil, some of that heat will go into evaporating that moisture. So with all this dry soil out there, it's actually heating up that much faster. And that heat then builds up in the air, and it makes the heat dome, as we've come to call this situation, much worse.
It's a vicious cycle where warmth and dry soil feed on each other, and the usual rains that would break the cycle don't come. Climate change heating the ocean plays a role in that, too.
Part of that story, for sure, is the fact that we have a large area of very warm water sitting off the west coast of North America, and it's really been there pretty much since late 2013. And this blob of warm water, in fact, it's called the warm blob, tends to create one of these northward swings in the jet stream right off of the west coast or right over the west coast. And so what that tends to do is carry the storms up into northern British Columbia and Alaska instead of into the western states. And so this is contributing to the drought that they've been experiencing really for multiple years out there, and contributing to those drier soils and contributing to things like the heat wave that's happening right now, which of course is also tied to fires and to a lot of struggles with the agricultural sector, dealing with these really large swings in precipitation from one year to the next.
Extreme rain has also become much more common, and the flooding that goes with it. Warm air makes water in the soil evaporate more quickly, and warmer air has more power to hold it, creating extremes of both drought and rain.
As the ocean and air warm, there's more evaporation, especially from water bodies like the oceans. So that's putting more water vapor into the atmosphere. And so when a storm comes along, that water vapor not only serves as fuel for that storm, because water vapor contains a lot of energy, so we're seeing stronger storms, but we're also seeing heavier precipitation events when a storm does happen. So the flip side of that is places that are usually on the dry side anyway, and they are also experiencing higher evaporation, but without the rain to replace it. So places that are typically dry are getting drier, and places that are typically wet are getting wetter.
We say the wet get wetter and the dry get drier, or the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. So wet regions, places where climate is naturally wet, we can expect to get more rain or heavier rain because the atmosphere is holding more water vapor. In dry regions, we can expect to get even drier because the atmosphere, if you will, is even thirstier when it's warmer. And we've even started using the term, you might have run across it, you'll hear the term flash drought. We've always talked about flash floods, rapid floods as flash floods. But now with these very rapidly developing droughts, we call them flash droughts because they do happen so much faster because a warmer atmosphere grabs more water from the plants and the soil.
That's Dr. Walt Robinson, professor of atmospheric sciences at North Carolina State University.
As the atmosphere gets warmer, it holds more water. And it's the water in the atmosphere in the form of water vapor that falls out as rain during rainstorms. And that's actually a pretty strong effect. For every, again, degree Fahrenheit of warming, it's about a 4% increase in how much water the atmosphere will hold. And that's actually an exponential dependence. That word exponential gets overused a lot. This is a case where it actually is exponential. The amount of water vapor the atmosphere holds increases exponentially with temperature.
A few kinds of extreme weather might decrease, but Francis says not many.
We're seeing a much lower frequency of breaking cold temperature records, but much more warm extremes and many more heavy downpours, more drought. Everything except those cold events are on the rise.
And if it seems to you that once you get into a new weather pattern, it gets stuck for a long time, you may be right. You may go a couple of weeks with no rain where that didn't happen before. Then, when the rain starts, it doesn't stop for a week. Francis says that may be climate change, too.
We think that one of the effects of the Arctic warming so much faster than elsewhere is contributing to the tendency for more of these very persistent weather regimes. And the reason for that is because as the Arctic warms so much faster than elsewhere, about 3 times faster now, that reduces the north to south temperature difference on the globe, or between the northern hemisphere, between the middle latitudes and the high latitudes. And it's that temperature difference that fuels the winds of the jet stream being this river of wind that blows around the northern hemisphere up at the levels where jets fly. And the jet stream creates all of our weather, because when the jet stream gets weaker, it tends to take bigger swings north and south. It's more easily deflected from its west to east path.
The issue here with the jet stream is it becoming less something we can count on to run what we call zonally, essentially from west to east, and something that's becoming more wavy, if you will? Is the jet stream getting more wavy, essentially meaning that the high pressure systems are stronger? Is it also getting stuck in place more often, so that when you get that ridge of high pressure, heat, and dry conditions, it is also sticking around for longer than it used to? And I think from a climate change perspective, we can't say for sure that this is happening yet, but what we can say is we're seeing more and more evidence that this kind of thing is happening. And from a risk management perspective, that's hugely important, because it suggests that as we move into the future, we need to plan for not just gradual increases, gradual changes, but some potential nonlinear surprises that are very hard to prepare for.
For example, the Pacific Northwest heat dome was a stunner, even for experts. The effects of climate change may already have turned a corner that we didn't think was coming for years.
Climate models may have underestimated the range of possible outcomes, and we could see a future with very different summer weather than anyone anticipated just a decade or two ago. I'm not saying for sure that's going to happen, but it's a growing risk that we may have underestimated.
That means heat waves and droughts will be more frequent. Major rainfall events and coastal flooding will increase as well, and wildfires will get even worse.
Are we going to see fire risk not go up a little bit, but go up a lot, and potentially some ecosystems shifting in profound ways? Are we going to see changes in human health? If you increase temperatures 3 degrees higher from, say, 100 degrees to 103 degrees, you're going to see major increases in human suffering, major decreases in human productivity, and major stresses on the electric grid as people need, as an issue of life and death, access to air conditioning and strain grids more as a result. I'd stop short of talking about apocalypse, but I have to say that I think as climate scientists, we have not done a good job of noting that there are some potentially catastrophic outcomes out there. Not saying for sure they're going to happen, but saying we need to do everything we can to become more resilient and to reduce emissions dramatically.
I think people should expect more of this kind of extreme weather. There's really no way around it. As we add energy to the atmosphere by warming it up and adding heat to the oceans, this is what happens. We're putting more energy into the system, and it's got to be released somehow, and storms are one of the main ways that happens.
You can find out more about all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. I'm Reed Pence.
With the summer break gear tucked away for the season and new school backpacks at the ready, it's time to be thinking about serving up tasty, healthy meals and snacks for those on-the-go, activity-filled days of fall. Including foods that kids love to eat, like fresh grapes, makes it easier. Registered dietitian Courtney Romano is a health advisor for the California Table Grape Commission.
Stock your kitchen with foods that are easy to eat, travel well, and can serve multiple functions, such as hummus, cheese, fruits, and veggies. For example, heart-healthy grapes can be tossed into yogurt or a breakfast smoothie, packed into lunches or sports bags for a fresh, hydrating snack. A bowl of grapes can serve as an easy side dish to a simple meal of soup and sandwiches.
Grapes from California are a natural source of antioxidants and other polyphenols. With just 90 calories for a 3/4 cup serving, no fat or cholesterol, and virtually no sodium, fresh grapes are a smart choice. Visit grapesfromcalifornia.com for more information.
New studies show for the first time that reducing air pollution may roll back the risk of dementia. Research reported at the Alzheimer's Association International Conference 2021 shows a clear connection between air quality and physical brain changes defining Alzheimer's disease. What's more, reducing fine particulate matter in the air is associated with slower cognitive decline and a 20% reduction in dementia risk. Claire Sexton is Director of Scientific Programs and Outreach at the Alzheimer's Association.
What's exciting is we're now seeing data showing that improving air quality may actually reduce the risk of dementia. Air pollution is bad for our brains and our overall health. This demonstrates the importance of policies and action by both governments and businesses that address air pollution.
Studies were conducted in large populations in the U.S. and France. Sexton says the findings are especially important in urban areas where higher levels of air pollution are common. Find out more at alz.org.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Radio Health Journal is a production of MediaTrax Communications. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more, and check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.
Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
How do I not feel shame and guilt every single day? The magnitude of making that decision and then living with it is almost impossible.
For birth mothers in adoptions, stigma and silence persist.
Then, what medical symptoms really mean and why we often overreact to them.
It's very easy to fall into the rabbit hole where you start off with a relatively benign symptom and you end up freaked out that you have some horrible disease.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.